This video will demonstrate some of the basic procedures in creating blend shapes for facial animation. I'm starting with a base model that has a neutral face position and a copy of the model that has already been sculpted using joints into an open mouth position. Now, this model has no transforms, it has no history, it has no skinning, nothing like that, no joints attached or anything. So before I start with any other steps, I'm going to first duplicate this model. I'll move it aside, name it something like default head, and hide it. I'll keep that version of the model in case I need to create new blend shapes later. I'm also going to duplicate this 2 more times. Now you'll notice as I move models around, that's not going to affect blend shapes because the transform node, the node that gives the model its position in space, does not directly affect the components. The blend shape compares different models on a component level, so as long as the local space for each model is unchanged, as long as the pivot is in the same place, as long as the vertices haven't been moved, then parts of that surface won't be affected. And the parts that will be affected are parts that we're going to sculpt next. Now, before I continue, I'm going to rename these surfaces. I'll call this one open mouth. I'll call this one smile wide, because it's going to be used for either a wide mouth position or what basically amounts to a smile. And this one will be narrow ooh. So a narrow mouth position or a mouth shape that represents the ooh sort of phoneme. Now I'm going to create a blend shape. I'll show you first creating the blend shape node just with 2 models, and the last one selected becomes the base mesh. Now, creating the blend shape is under the rigging menu under deform, blend shape. I'll look at the options and make sure that that's default by choosing edit reset, and then click create. Now if I open up the blend shape window, the blend shape editor, I can see that I have a blend shape. It has a single slider that slides the mouth open and closed, and that position is named for the model that is used to create that blend shape. That's open mouth, and the name maps here. So it makes it easier to identify which sliders are which. Now I'm going to create 2 new blend sliders, one for each of these meshes. I'll select them both, shift select the base mesh, and go to deform, edit blend shape, add, and that adds 2 new sliders. Now because these have not been modified in any way, changing the sliders does not affect the base mesh in any way either. There are no changes. This one still works as it did before. And now I can begin sculpting. For this one, it's the wide mouth position, so I'll use the sculpting brush to do this. And I'll open the tool settings window to make this a little bit easier. This object, I'm going to use the mirroring method object X. So that'll mirror across the x-axis in the object's space. So any changes that I make to the surface will be applied equally to both halves. Now the first thing to note about a smile is it's not a U shape like in cartoons. It's not a pulling up of the corners of the mouth. Really the best way to describe a smile is the corners of the mouth get pulled back along the jaw, and the entire mouth, both upper and lower lips, get pulled up a little bit. Now that'll also involve some other parts of the face too, a little bit around the nose. Usually the corners of the eyes get pushed up by the cheeks as the cheeks get pulled around by the muscles underneath. So I'll do a little bit of sculpting. The direction that I'm going to choose for sculpting is Z, so that when I push my model around, it's going to push only on the Z direction. Now this is pulling at the moment, so that's the wrong direction. I'll hold Control to push instead of pull, and that pushes the corners of the mouth back. I'll I'll make this a little bit more extreme. I also want this to make the mouth a little bit wider, so I'm going to affect the model on the x-axis now and pull outward a little ways. And before I go too far, I actually want to start evaluating the blend shape immediately. So I'll slide this on and off and see what it looks like. It looks like a pretty dead smile because only the corners of the mouth are pulling back, and it's not affecting the eyes in any way. I want to see from a few different angles how effective this is. It's looking a little bit weird, so I'll switch back to my Z-axis in the brush. Oops. Wrong direction. Object X mirroring and Z direction. Now the next area I want to work on is the cheeks. The cheeks really should be pushed up by a smile. So I'm going to work on the Y-axis now and pull the cheeks up a little bit. I don't want to affect the eyelids too much. I want to affect around the eyelids. And if I had any sort of textural animation like a displacement map or bump map representing creasing around the corners of the eyes, I could add that to the solution to make the face poses even more dynamic. The next change I'll make is to move the lips up a little bit. Now that's moving okay. Now I also want to compare these mouth positions in combination with the open mouth. So I'll open the mouth and slide this back and see how it looks. And it looks a little bit strange in the corners here, but it's okay. Now I'll work on the narrow mouth position. For the narrow mouth position, basically the opposite applies. The corners of the mouth will come forward and in, but the lips are not going to move up or down much at all. They may stay right about where they are in terms of their vertical position on the face. Another important thing to note when I'm working on this is that I'm thinking about the direction of motion for each vertex as they would be affected by muscles, and if the underlying surface, if the geometry reflects the direction of the muscles well, then that's very easy to do. I can pull each point in straight lines along their own edges, and that'll mimic the muscle motions nicely. Here it may also help to turn on the wireframe display so that I can see if points are starting to bunch up in unnatural ways. This can also help me visualize where the textures are going to end up on the surface, if there's going to be distortion in some areas more than others. Now I'm smoothing out any wrinkles that were on the face before, because this sort of mouth position should pull on the skin and reduce creasing, not increase it. And I think I'll also push in on the cheeks a little bit. Again, it's very important to evaluate these mouth shapes along with the mouth in the open position. And this is a fairly extreme one, so it's a little bit odd. But I'm noticing that even with the mouth open a little bit, I should be pushing the corners of the mouth just a hair back because they're out too far. It ends up feeling like the mouth is convex. And lastly, it's important not to try to compare any of the mouth positions with both the smile and the narrow together, because they are moving all the muscles in opposite directions. They should never combine. You end up with a messy looking face if you try to put the two together. I've also noticed that in my smile position the nose looks very stiff, so I'm going to do a little bit of work on that as well. And this combination of shapes should now give us enough to work with in order to create basic lip sync.